Good morning and welcome to the AgNow Roundup. My name is Dave Deacon. Soybeans are grown across the globe and the majority of the acres actually come from the Western Hemisphere, leading to a three-way battle between Brazil, Argentina, and the U.S. almost every year when it comes to acreage. Within the U.S., soybeans are grown in over half of our states. With warm and extended growing seasons in the southern regions of the U.S., this creates an ideal environment for soybeans, allowing for multiple planting dates and harvesting. Additionally, advancements in technologies such as precision farming and variety options have played a crucial role in optimizing soybean productivity. This morning on the AgNow Roundup, we're looking at soybean production across the South, and we're talking with Auburn University's Dr. Eros Francisco and Oklahoma State University's Dr. Josh Lofton. But first, let's take a look at the weather across the southern soybean region and the rest of the United States with meteorologist Matt Makins.
Matt Makins here with your AgNow weather report. We've got a more active weather pattern coming our way. This animation is the precipitation as we go throughout the next week. The focus is going to be the Gulf Coast, New England states, and the far west. So as this plays through a couple of times, you're going to see those bullseyes throughout the course of this week. From a hazard standpoint, perhaps the biggest thing that I'll be watching, or most important area that I'll be watching, is the Gulf Coast. We may see tropical development as that area of showers, that area of disturbed weather moves over Florida and then hits the Atlantic. There is at least some possibility that a tropical system will develop out of that, and then of course that would carry impact along the eastern seaboard. So that's something to watch out for. In addition to that, it's going to be the heaviness of the precipitation out to the west. As this animation plays through, I'm just going to talk about a more active weather pattern evolving. As you look at in historic context, the way that the atmosphere is beginning to behave and appears to behave as we get into Thanksgiving, the end of November, early December, historically, and how the atmosphere is kind of merging now or behaving now is going to be much more active, meaning we're going to have a lot more frequent storm systems pass across the country, and with that, increased chances for, say, wintry impacts or delays to travel for Thanksgiving, for one example. And we'll also be watching out for shots of cold to be moving through. And from an ag standpoint, obviously, cold with wet is a problem for cattle producers. Cold can be a problem with the emerging wheat or emerging crops or existing crops. So a lot to watch out for the next couple of weeks. Enough on that. Let me get into the details of what we're expecting as we go with total precip for the next week. This is kind of into early Thanksgiving week, so through the 20th. But that bullseye is mostly going to be southern states, so along the Gulf Coast from that tropical system. I'll zoom in just a moment. For the west, from anywhere from Canada all the way down to the south to Baja, so all along that west coast, we're looking at pretty substantial totals. 1 to 3 inch totals for total precip. But again, it's the bullseye down here to the south and east that is going to be the highest totals. So you see all these red colorations and the deeper purples. That's 2, 2.5, 3 inches. Should a tropical storm or depression form, we'll have to watch as these totals may need to go much, much higher, especially if that system should slow down in any amount. But certainly from Texas out to Florida, that's going to be the most active area and most impactful area of weather for the week ahead. In terms of snowfall, if we're worried about cold, most of that's limited to the high country. There'll be some hit and miss pockets of some snow here and there, but overall the next week is going to be relatively tame compared to what comes through closer to Thanksgiving and the week beyond. And we'll have more on that on future AgNow weather reports. As far as the temperatures, this is kind of a risk analysis, if you will, risk toward production areas. So this would be the probability of hitting 36 degrees, frosty. And that's going to be possible down into parts of Mexico, New Mexico, Texas, parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina may hit those frosty temperatures. As far as hitting freezing, North Texas, New Mexico, pretty limited as you go down to the south and east. But there's going to be some substantial cold here. This is the probability of hitting 15 degrees. factor in wind too, and some moisture, that's going to be problematic. And that's mostly going to be confined to the central and northern plains. But this breakout gives you an idea of where we're headed beyond this week into the following week. So this goes out 10 days, but we're going to be bringing in more and more shots of cold and may be impactful on the ag industry. But for now, that's your AgNow Weather Report. I'm Matt Makins. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Soybean production really took off in the mid-1850s across the U.S. Corn Belt and has a very interesting story on how the seeds actually got there. We'll save that for a future episode. But over the decades since, thanks to research and plant breeding, the soybean crop has extended to one that has grown in just under 30 of our 50 states. This morning, we're talking about soybean production across the South, and our first stop is with Auburn University's Dr. Eros Francisco. Dr. Francisco, thanks for going on with us. And let's start out with, how are things looking across Alabama when it comes to soybeans in 2023?
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave. This morning is kind of different than you. You have a blue sky. I have a cloudy sky. But anyways, well, soybeans in 2023 in Alabama were a little bit worse than last year. I think last year was better. Corn was not good last year, but it was wonderful this year. And it was the opposite for soybeans. Soybeans were greater last year, and it was okay this year. Some issues here and there that we can discuss.
What has your drought outlook been, or I guess what's the drought situation been throughout Alabama this year?
Well, this year was pretty much in the northwestern part of the state was very dry, and it was dry for almost months, 2 months, or very little rain, very high temperatures, over hundreds. And that affected very much that part of the state. And we are talking about Lauderdale, Limestone, Lawrence, Morgan, Colbert County. That north part of the Tennessee River is still Alabama, not Tennessee, but still Alabama. Mm-hmm. While the rest of the state was okay regarding rain or precipitation. So in the south, we have the Gulf Coast conditions they got some dry weather here and there, but not so bad. In the northeastern part of the state, that is in the Sand Mountain portion of the state, that was okay. The rains were, not so good, but they were not as bad as the other part, the western part.
Whenever it comes to soybeans, they require management, but then they also do require that moisture in the soil. What issues have you seen with the crop this year?
When we talk about drought effect in a soybean field, we really need to put the growth stages in perspective, right? Because the beginning, we need to get a stand. And so we need moisture for the seeds to emerge and the seedlings to develop, and then the plant to start growing. By flowering or the beginning of setting pods, that's another crucial part of the stage that we need to have moisture in the ground. But then the real bad situation would be no rain or a dry soil over pod filling. And that what happened in most of the northwestern part of the Alabama state this year. So we had, if we compare full beans versus beans after wheat, the full beans were better because they started flowering and setting pods and filling pods sooner than the second soybeans, and that helped a lot the yields. So soybean after wheat suffered more with drought. They were facing lack of rain in most of the filling of the pods. So we got incomparable yields here and there. I heard cases of 20 bushels, 30 bushels in dry fields versus 95, 100 bushels per acre in very good rain conditions. And separated by 100 miles or so. So that was crazy to see how the drought affected the development of the beans.
When it comes to soybeans across Alabama, are they isolated to one part of the state, or is it a crop that grows from south to north?
Well, we can say that 75, almost 80% of beans are the acreage is in the north part of the state, and that would be northeastern and western. More in the western, but a bit in the eastern side as well. While in the central and south, there are fields scattered all over the place, but the core of the acreage would be in the north. So that's why most of the effect of the drought effect is going to be impacting the total production of beans. Some other problems that we had, not problem we had every season, but some situations that we also happened this season regarding diseases. Diseases are always present, but I saw some aerial blight, rhizoctonia cases. Vein necrosis, which is a virus transmitted by thrips. That was more often than normal, I guess. Green stem was a problem in most of the parts, especially in the parts with the drought effect. And a possibility for that is I can speculate because green stem is caused by a number of factors, but I see as two possible factors. The drought effect causing a disbalance or a misbalance in the source drain relation in the plant. So we had for a period of time good soil moisture and the plants developing well. So they accumulated carbohydrates, they photosynthesized enough, but when it got to the filling of the pods, the soil was dry and the plant was suffering with the heat, so the movement from the stems or the leaves to the pods were very slow, and that may cause the green stem. Also, another possibility, even though you have potassium levels high in the soil, if you don't have moisture, the plant is not uptaking potassium, and potassium is demanded until the end of the cycle. It is very important for the soybean plants filling the seeds and filling the pods that potassium is available in the soil. So that might be another factor causing green stem as well.
Whenever there's the possibility of a change in El Nino and La Nina, there's a lot of excitement. And this year, there's a possibility of a strengthening El Nino pattern. How does that impact the state of Alabama? But then also, what lessons have you learned from the 23 crop that could be applied to an El Nino pattern in Alabama?
That's a very good question, Dave. If we see the pattern of El Nino and La Nina to Alabama, El Nino pretty much dries the north of the state, while La Nina dries the south of the state. So if 2023 was a year of El Nino or kind of a El Nino pattern, we did see the effect of drought in the north of the state, more towards the western part. So that's a pretty good El Nino pattern. While we have the south with more rain and precipitation. So if there was an El Nino in 2023, that is the expectation coming from an El Nino pattern. If it progresses or stay in 2024, it's going to be, I would say, it's going to be bad for growers in the north part of the state. Another 2 years in a row with a drought problem to fight. So that would be not good for the north of the state, where most of the crops are. Well, at least soybean, corn, wheat, while cotton and peanuts are more in the south. If we progress to La Nina or neutral would be okay. But if we progress to La Nina, that would be good for the growers in the north of the state, but not for the growers in the south of the state. So that is the pattern that goes on with La Nina and El Nino in Alabama.
One of the great things about doing the AgNow Roundup, I get to talk with researchers and extension folks from all over the country. What are you doing in the realm of research for the soybean producers in Alabama?
Oh, great question. So as a grain crop specialist, my focus is in a broad, general perspective. So I have trials and research going on plant population, effect, seeding rate, um, planting dates, some fertility trials, some disease trials focusing on beans and wheat. I had a very nice results coming from a nitrogen timing of application on corn. Um, I also interact with the Science for Success group of soybean specialists from different parts of the country. That's a very strong group, and we had 2 years of biologicals study doing seed treatment for soybeans. We are putting down a proposal for more study on nitrogen, residual nitrogen for soybeans. Um, I study with seed quality and understanding how vigor and germination can help or need help to overcome problems like deep seeding depth, soil moisture, soil temperature. So we are trying to understand how, if we can do something to help the seedlings to thrive over these type of problems coming from a low vigor type of seeds. I know we are not saying that the seeds that are being delivered to growers with problem. We are just trying to understand, if I have a lot with a low vigor or a low germination, what can I do to help that lot to succeed in a field? And also, I think not most, but some growers, they try to save their seeds or save some of the varieties. So we know that the conditions of storage in the farm is not perfect. So that can create some problems for growers as well.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Francisco, for going on with us to talk about the Alabama soybean crop.
Hey, Dave, thank you for having me.
From Alabama, we head to Oklahoma and we catch up with Oklahoma State University's cropping system specialist, Dr. Josh Lofton. Josh, let's take a look at the soybean crop of 23 across Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting the last acres kind of in the bin. I think for the most part, we're done across the state. We might have some really late double crop acres that are still out there, but for the most part, we're pretty much in. And it's been a mixed year. Of course, it was a very dry year for us for the bulk majority of the summer, and so that caused some issues. Just like any other year in Oklahoma, it really depended on what mile marker you had your farm to determine how well you yielded, based on if you got that pop-up rain shower or you didn't. We have some of our producers across the state are reporting very nice yields, particularly of the later planted. So our double crop or just the later planted soybean systems are doing a little bit better, a little fairer across. Even some of our growers that planted full season, so that April or May planted soybeans, they didn't produce anything. They hayed up the crop and took it out before we even got to the end of the season. So it's been very similar to what you would remember the 2022 on, although we are getting better. That later crop, that double crop or that later planted soybean does hold some promise to us, and we've seen some really nice yields from those.
Why does it seem that a double crop seems to work better than a full season crop in your state?
Yeah, so in Oklahoma, in soybean in general, the whole intent is to try to match good rainfall with some moderate temperatures during the most critical stages of soybean production. So we're talking about flowering, post-flowering into pod development and into seed fill. And so in Oklahoma, if we plant in April and we really hit into a rough July, that's when we really start seeing pod fill and seed fill really start ramping up, especially that later into July, first part of August. And that in Oklahoma it can be our hottest and our driest periods. And this year, depending on where you were, that was a hot and dry period. The thing that really got us this year, though, Dave, is that September. We had September record high temperatures. We had temperatures well into the hundreds throughout August into September, and that really took a lot of our normal season or that early planted, that April and May planted systems, that took them down a peg, or it made them to where they didn't even yield. Where our double crop systems didn't even start going to reproductive until that later part of September into October. And so we got a lot more favorable conditions then with some rain showers, maybe some more moderate temperatures, and those late season rains really helped us out on the double crop. So it's all about matching what we typically get as good conditions with the most critical times of that soybean plant. And for Oklahoma, the double crop, while it is riskier because we do plant it later and we typically have a shorter crop that does not have as long to develop, it also gets paired with typically some much more favorable conditions on that back end of the season.
Whenever you think of Oklahoma's climate, you may not think that it's suitable for crops outside of, say, a wheat or something that's drought hardy. Why does soybean seem to work so well in the state?
Well, I mean, we got a nice market for it, and then it fits within our system. And you know, whenever you take a system-based approach or you look at things from a system-wide perspective, that's why that double crop system is so favorable for some of our folks, especially the ones that are getting out west to where they are getting into that area that would be considered fringe acres for soybean production. That double crop does work out best for them, and more often than not, that'll be the higher yielding system. But then whenever you take a look at Oklahoma in general, and we get to the eastern side of the state, so we're talking east of that Tulsa area, whenever we get closer to Missouri and into the Arkansas, those are very favorable conditions, and those producers typically have a lot more favorable conditions, not only for full season, but for double crop. Now, this year just wasn't the case because of how dry it was, but that's the part of the state that we really typically see our full season numbers spike up a lot, and is what we call our more traditional or the soybean production acres that are more historic. That's been the part of the state where we've seen a soybean for a much longer period of time. Some of our western, with better genetics, better cropping systems, no-till production, we've started to see more and more soybean to develop. So that's our new and developing region, and it really favors either some later full season or some double crop production.
Whenever it comes to soybeans this year, you mentioned the drought, but were there other issues facing this crop in the realm of disease or insect pressure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we had some insect problems here and there. You know, if we take a look at some of our other summer crops, you know, they had quite a bit of pest pressures, some disease pressure kind of set in. Soybean actually didn't have that bad of an issue. We didn't see our major pests that we saw throughout the summer was chinch bugs and our corn and our sorghum system. Chinch bugs aren't as negative towards soybean. We have seen them be an issue really early in soybean systems where the bugs just kind of overwhelm a small seedling. But once the soybean plant kind of gets up and starts developing, we don't see them as impactful as we do in corn, but especially grain sorghum systems. So we were relatively low on stink bug activity. We did have some across the state, but they were relatively low, pretty low on podworm. We did have some grasshoppers come in. I mean, a hot and dry year, we always talk about grasshoppers in Oklahoma, and we did get some foliar feeding, but we did have enough kind of pasture ground that was being rehabilitated that a lot of times the grasshoppers stuck into that area. And so pest pressure was not nearly as bad as it could be or it has been in recent years. It's really that heat and the dryness that got to us this year.
We've seen that Bixby, Oklahoma is kind of your laboratory, for lack of a better word, for your research into soybeans. What are you working on there right now, and what other experiments are you working on across the state?
Yeah, so we typically have two kind of epicenters, if you will, to where we do a lot of research. Bixby is very similar to what we see in the eastern part of our state. So We have irrigation there, but we typically get much favorable moisture patterns, and the soils are coming off the river, and so they're very similar to what growers in the eastern side of the state have. We also have a big system over in Perkins, which is just down from Stillwater, that looks a lot more like our western production. So we typically try to pair things in those two systems to see how well a practice or a trial would do on the eastern side of the state as well as the western side of the state. And so we've had quite a bit throughout. Our big one that we got asked a lot of times this year, or a lot of times the last couple of years, is looking at PGRs. We've looked at these plant growth regulators, and if you think about plant growth regulators, soybean is probably not the crop you would think about using them on. You maybe think about cotton, you maybe think about some of your ornamentals, various other things, but the intent for that is that we typically get very nice Aprils and Mays with some good moisture, maybe some cooler temperatures, and when our full season growers plant that crop, they get very, very big, tall soybeans that got a lot of biomass to them. When July comes, that we don't have enough moisture to kind of sustain those larger systems, and that's where we start seeing yield loss kind of pop up and occur. And so we've been looking into mitigating some of that early season growth, or managing it a little bit better to shorten that crop up, very similar to what you would do in cotton. Make that internode length a little bit smaller, make it to where we don't put as much leaves on, maybe promote branching or root activity, and see if that helps out. And this year we found that we had a great year for it. It's very similar to what we would see, great April and May, and then it really turned off hot and dry in June or July and August. And we really saw some positive benefits from that. So whether that'll be economical, we haven't run the numbers yet, Dave, but is a nice little trial that we've done there. The other thing is, because we have such a diversity in our production systems, we've wanted to see how varieties respond to those. Being that a lot of our growers like branching soybean varieties because they think that helps mitigate against some of these stressors of the main stem. And so we've looked at a couple of varieties and really have seen a big difference in not only does soybean plant branch or not when put into these various conditions, but how much yield that it actually puts onto these branches is our mitigating factor. So it doesn't matter that they put on branches, it's the yield that goes onto that. So looking at that physiological differences between these different parts of the state and how a similar soybean variety responds across these very different production systems has been a big key for us. Now, Dave, one thing that we're starting to integrate into next year is, I'm sure you're familiar, but maybe some of the listeners aren't, of this TAPS program. So it's it's a means to integrate grower input and grower activity onto some research trials, basically giving them a nice little playground that if they ever wanted to try something like a foliar fertilizer or really low plant populations, they can participate in this TAPS trial in soybean that we're going to have this next year. And they're going to be able to play around with some of the components and being able to see how that changes their production system to where they potentially would maybe integrate that into their field in coming years once they've seen how it actually plays out in the field. So really interesting to maybe bring that in. Our Nebraska kind of, I think, has been the start of a lot of that. In Oklahoma, we've had that out in the Panhandle, and we're starting to bring that bigger question on more system-based and large-scale management of these crops, and let growers have that input on kind of what's going on and what's happening out in the field. So something to look forward to next year as we're kind of promoting that at end of this year.
That is one of the great things about a land-grant university. It is that integration between the university, but then also the producer who's using that information. But this is an opportunity for the producer to kind of work with the university in finding a better way to grow the crop.
Yeah, and it's like we said, one of the best things is them allowing them maybe that don't want to do on-farm research. So some of our growers like that on-farm research, and they can play around with inputs and practices that they want to on a small scale, but some of them are not as comfortable with it. And so we allow them to say, or, we tell them, hey, we're still going to do the research, but what do you want to do? What do you want to play around with? Is this, or is there a product that you've seen out there that you really want to try and manage it the way that the companies say, and really see if that product works. And you don't have to lose yield over it if it doesn't do well. We'll lose yield. That's fine, but we'll allow you to show you how it happens. The other great thing about that is it allows growers to see what other growers are trying and practicing. So it's not just what they do;
Right.
It's what their neighbors and their partner does. And OSU is going to have a plot there, but it's just going to be our recommendations. So it would be how we would recommend growing a soybean plant. And you could say, hey, doing this actually added five or so bushels on what OSU recommends. So that could be a future recommendation or a change in practice that we would kind of look a little bit further into. So helps us get a little bit better cooperation with growers, and it allows some of those growers to have a larger hand in that research process.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Josh Lofton with Oklahoma State University, for going on with us and talking about the soybean crop across Oklahoma.
Oh, fantastic. Great to be here.
Well, and we want to thank you for watching this episode of the AgNow Roundup. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, agnowtv.com. And while you're there, sign up for our weekly email and check out our social media. As a side note, we are taking next week off for Thanksgiving, but we will be returning on the 28th. And until then, from our farm to your farm, I'm Dave Deacon for AgNow.